The year is 2025. The world is a very different place. A place where the familiar has become strange and the strange familiar. Gone are the days of global cooperation, replaced by a fragmented world where alliances are fragile and fleeting. We now live in a time of economic uncertainty, where the stability we once took for granted is a distant memory. The global economy is teetering on the brink, with markets crashing and financial systems in disarray. International tensions are running high, with conflicts simmering just below the surface, ready to erupt at any moment. The post-pandemic recovery was uneven at best, leaving many nations struggling to find their footing. Many countries are struggling with debt and inflation, their economies burdened by the weight of financial crises. People are worried about their jobs and their futures, uncertain of what tomorrow will bring. It's into this powder keg of a world that, in what can only be described as a collective global cry of, "Oh, for fuck's sake, not this again," Donald Trump, having apparently discovered the portrait in the attic aging at a slightly faster rate than he was, rode back into the White House on a platform that can best be described as, "We're gonna build the wall, and this time Mexico's gonna pay for it. In pesos, in person, and maybe also throw in some nachos. With guacamole. Look, we'll negotiate the guacamole, but the wall is non-negotiable." The world, understandably, took a collective deep breath and braced itself for what was to come. Because if there's one thing the world has learned about Donald Trump, it's that when he says he's going to do something batshit crazy, he's not kidding. And so it began, a new chapter in an already tumultuous era. Trump, never one to disappoint when it comes to disappointingly predictable things, immediately reinstated his America First policy. Because, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Unless it is America's standing in the world, in which case, by all means, break the shit out of it. This policy was a cornerstone of his previous administration, and he seemed determined to double down on it. First on the agenda, tariffs, big ones, on pretty much everything, but especially on foreign cars. These tariffs were meant to protect American industries, but the ripple effects were felt far and wide, because nothing screams "Make America Great Again" like making it really, really expensive for Americans to buy cars. Unless, of course, you're talking about American-made cars, in which case, those are still ridiculously overpriced. But at least they're American. Probably. The irony was not lost on the average consumer. The tariffs, as you might imagine, went over about as well as a fart in a spacesuit. The economic strain was palpable, and the public reaction was swift and unforgiving. The Europeans, the Japanese, the Canadians, pretty much everyone who wasn't America was pissed. Diplomatic relations took a nosedive as allies felt the sting of these economic measures. And they weren't just going to take it lying down, they were going to retaliate. Oh, were they going to retaliate? Trade wars loomed on the horizon, and the global market braced for impact. Meanwhile, back in the good old US of A, things weren't exactly peachy keen either. Sure, some people were happy about the tariffs. They liked the idea of sticking it to the foreigners. They liked the idea of bringing back manufacturing jobs. They liked the idea of making America great again. But here's the thing about tariffs. They're a tax on consumers, a tax that drives up the price of everything. And so, while some people might have been cheering, a lot more people were finding that their wallets were a whole lot lighter. The price of cars skyrocketed. The price of electronics went through the roof. The price of everything, it seemed, went up, except for wages, which remained stubbornly stagnant. And as the cost of living soared, so too did the level of discontent. A continent divided. Across the pond, the Europeans were not amused. They saw the tariffs for what they were, an attack on their economies, an attempt to divide and conquer, and they weren't going to stand for it. The French, in particular, were pissed. They'd been hit hard by the tariffs on cars, and they weren't going to take it lying down. They responded with tariffs of their own, slapping them on everything from American wine to American cheese to, yes, even American reality TV shows. But the French weren't just content with retaliatory tariffs. They saw an opportunity to take the lead in Europe, to forge a united front against American aggression. They started talking about a European army, about a European Union that was more than just a loose collection of countries, but a true superpower in its own right. From cars to tanks. The French automotive industry, once a symbol of national pride, was in crisis. The American tariffs had hit them hard, and sales had plummeted. Factories were closing. Workers were being laid off. The situation was dire. But the French are nothing if not resourceful. They'd been in tight spots before. They'd faced down empires. They'd stared down revolutions. And they weren't about to let a little thing like a trade war break them. They would adapt. They would innovate. They would, in the words of the immortal Marie Antoinette, let them build tanks. Okay, so maybe Marie Antoinette didn't actually say that. But the sentiment remains. The French automotive industry, facing extinction, pivoted. They turned their considerable expertise from building cars to building tanks. And not just any tanks. These were high-tech, state-of-the-art killing machines designed to strike fear into the hearts of their enemies. A world rearming. The trade war between the United States and Europe had a ripple effect across the globe. Countries around the world, seeing the two superpowers at each other's throats, started to worry. They started to rearm. They started to form new alliances. The world, it seemed, was preparing for war. In Europe, the rearmament was particularly pronounced. Germany, which had long resisted calls to increase its military spending, finally caved. France, emboldened by its new fleet of tanks, ramped up its military production. Even smaller countries, like Belgium and the Netherlands, started to beef up their defenses. The world was a more dangerous place than it had been in decades. The threat of war, once a distant possibility, now loomed large. The trade war, it seemed, had changed everything. The future of trade. Uncertainty and opportunity. So, here we are in 2025, staring down the barrel of a future that looks increasingly uncertain. The world is grappling with unprecedented challenges, and the stakes have never been higher. The world is a more dangerous place, a more divided place, a more expensive place. Every day we see the consequences of these divisions and the rising costs of living. Globalization, the force that was supposed to bring us all together, to create a more peaceful and prosperous world, seems to be in retreat. The interconnectedness that once promised so much now feels like a distant dream. In its place, we have protectionism, isolationism, and a resurgence of nationalism. Countries are closing their borders, and the spirit of cooperation is being replaced by a desire to go it alone. But perhaps, just perhaps, there is hope. In the midst of this turmoil, there are glimmers of possibility, moments where we can see a different path forward. Perhaps this crisis, this retreat from globalization, is an opportunity to rethink the way we do things. Maybe it's a chance to innovate, to find new solutions that are more sustainable and inclusive. Perhaps it's a chance to build a more just and equitable global system, one that works for everyone, not just the wealthy and powerful. We could create a world where fairness and cooperation are at the forefront. Or maybe, just maybe, I'm full of shit. It's easy to be cynical, to doubt that real change is possible. Because if there's one thing history has taught us, it's that we, as a species, are really good at fucking things up. Time and again, we've seen how our best intentions can lead to disaster. And this whole trade war thing? It's a complex and volatile situation. This has the potential to be a real clusterfuck of epic proportions. The consequences could be far-reaching and devastating, affecting every corner of the globe.